before I get into how do we prioritize it, I really want to kind of talk a little bit about what really is tech debt. And I think there is a general misconception that exists in our community. Okay, tech debt is an intentional choice. Mess is a poor execution. So that's kind of what makes engineering very difficult. And that's the value that an engineering leader needs to add. If you believe that whatever everybody else is standing on one side of the table touting X, and you should have the insight and the willingness to say not X, Y, and Y is the correct answer. Right? And I see a lot of engineering leaders not take that responsibility.
And we are live. Welcome, Abhinav, to the next edition of Pakka Nimbu podcast. Glad to have you here.
No, it's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Abhinav is CTO of Practo. Practo needs no introduction. And do you want to introduce yourself, Abhinav?
So I'm Abhinav. I'm the co-founder and CTO at Practo. I started the company back in 2008. Practo is the first and the only place I've ever worked because we started the company while we were still doing our BTech at NIT Surathkal. Now it's been a 16 years journey with lots of ups and downs, but the amount of learning has been phenomenal.
Yeah, and Practo turned profitable very recently. So congratulations on that.
Yes. Thank you so much. No, it's been a long time coming. I mean, we were a bootstrap company for the first 3 years, so we were profitable for quite some time, and it's good to be profitable again after a long gap.
It's amazing to see one of the core Indian startups hit this milestone. Couldn't be more happy, Abhinav. Okay, so this is a tech podcast, and let's dive right into the tech side of things. Let's reveal some technical layers of Practo. Let's start with the current tech stack. How does Practo run? What does it run on?
So it's a slightly complex question, and for us, even though it seems on the surface very simple, what Practo runs on today is majority of it is Java microservices, MySQL. Now we are on AWS. We actually went to AWS in 2010, so very early days when there were only EC2 and S3, the two services available. Now all of it runs on Kubernetes, which we adopted back in 2018. But beyond that, of course, our tech stack is quite diverse. So we have some of the early services that I wrote in PHP, which still have survived. We have a little bit of Python, a little bit of Ruby because of a couple of companies that we acquired. Our mobile apps are all native, so Android and iOS, because we launched our apps back in 2013, so very early days of mobile. Our front end is mostly React, with the sprinkles of Angular kind of lurking here and there still. So that's pretty much it. But these days, anything new that we are creating is Java, React, and we continue doing native development with some sprinkles of React Native again here and there.
Okay, PHP was quite a rage, it seems, back in late 2000s. I was chatting with HackerRank CTO, and it seems like they also had their first version on PHP. Does it survive still? I assume not. Is all of the PHP written into some other language at this point?
Not all of it. Not all of it, and it's a conscious call we have taken. Now, some people may not agree with me on these regards, but there are still older things which are running in PHP. These are not our consumer-facing product. These are mostly our provider-facing side products, and we are still doing active development on those code bases, right? Because we believe that the cost of actually migrating it to a newer language, to the delta value addition that writing it in new language that it will bring is fairly minimal. Right. So even though we have discussed it multiple times over the last decade or so, we haven't really found a good reason of why we should do it. Still, right? People have made a lot of cases to me, but we haven't found one yet.
So by provider side, you mean on the doctors and the clinic side?
Yes, that's what I mean.
And then I assume that the scale is going to be fairly low on that side, so that shouldn't be a concern.
It may seem like the scale would be low, but it's actually fairly large compared to most. So think of it as an at-scale SaaS application, right? Like Practo, which is one of our older applications, which was the first application that we built, which is the clinic management software used by doctors at clinic, right? And that is still mostly PHP, right? And that actually is used by about 50,000 doctors every month across the globe. We have, just to give you some sense of scope, the software is been used to manage about 200 million appointments over the last 15 years. So it's not a really small scale, right? But what a lot of people don't realize, and at least my learning has been that PHP actually scales pretty well as long as you don't do extremely poor, you don't make extremely poor design choices, right? So we've seen it scale, and if you look at some of the biggest platforms in the world today, right, still run on PHP. All of 30% of internet on WordPress runs on PHP. Facebook still runs on PHP. Of course, they call it Hack now. With they have their own interpreter, but still runs on PHP and runs pretty well.
Right. So which side gets more throughput? I was mentioning smaller scale,
comparatively,
not small
yes.
scale.
Yeah, comparatively, yes, of course. The consumer side has higher throughput compared to our provider side product, but it's not a 10x difference. I wouldn't say our provider side is still maybe, consumer side is maybe 4x, 5x bigger than our provider side. But our provider side is also fairly large because that's the core of our business, right? Like every consumer experience that you actually see on Practo is in some way powered by the tools and the products that are used by the provider side. So when you go to book an appointment on Practo.com today, the availability is coming in real time from the provider software. So in some way, you actually, even the consumer experiences end up touching our provider side services.
Right, and it makes sense because a patient is going to open Practo probably to book an appointment or do some use for a few minutes. Versus hospitals and clinics, they are going to just have the software open and use it throughout the day.
Yeah.
So that adds to the throughput as well.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. What are the suite of products that are currently offered? Can you list them? One is Practo, which is the clinic management software. The other is the counterpart on the consumer side.
Yes. So Practo actually has. So let me start by on the doctor's side, right? We actually have two major products today. One is Practo, which I talked about already. It's a clinic management software. More than 50,000 doctors use it across the country. It's actually the de facto, the largest software platform for doctors in India. Our second product is called Insta. Insta is a hospital management system. So it's kind of the moment you kind of graduate from small clinic to a larger hospital setup, is the software that actually powers that. That's actually has a lot more presence outside of India than in India. So Insta has customers in about 22 countries across the world. And then on the consumer side, of course, when it comes to doctors, we have two core products. One is booking appointment, and another is telemedicine, right? Which is actually the video, audio, chat, the three medium through which you can actually converse with a doctor. We do provide medicine delivery. We do provide at-home diagnostics. These are the two core services. And then we have our third pillar, which is our corporate business, where we actually provide a bundle of these services to companies to provide as a value-added services for their employees. So let's say a company can actually go and say, I'm going to provide teleconsultation and cover the cost for my employees as a value-added services. So they can actually purchase that from us. We actually manage more than 1 million lives on that service today. And last but not least, now we are in actual healthcare delivery, which we just talked about it a few weeks back. Going a little deeper into healthcare, where we actually now operate a large number of dental clinics, and we are actually expanding to more specialty in the coming years.
Got it. Awesome. So now looking at this from the tech perspective, um, are all of this built on common underlying platforms, or do they have their own like backbones and they are sort of siloed systems from the tech perspective?
So it's a mixture of both. So the way at least we try to think about it, and I should be upfront, right? There is an ideal world that you want to create, and then there is the
Right.
reality of running a business. The way we think about it is that there are the platform level services which are actually common in Practo. So when I say platform level
Okay.
services, when you think about logging, when you think about error monitoring, when you think about performance monitoring, if you think about authentication, if you think about you know
Yeah.
caching, a lot of these are actually common platform layers that are built, including our deployment pipeline, test automation, staging, server management, right? All these
Okay.
pieces are actually kind of the common layer um, that we built over the years. A lot of it is actually built in house. So just to give you an example, right, our deployment tool that we use is called Dplex. We actually built it in house back in 2012, 2013. And the reason why we had to build it in house is because back in those days, the number of automated deployment tool with rollback that were available in the market to do or to work with EC2 auto scaling and everything. There was no product in the market at that point of time. So we had to actually invent that and build it, right? But the idea has
Right.
always been that we wanted to build these primitives which actually allow teams to focus on the actual value delivery, right?
Hmm.
So our deployment tool, Dplex today powers almost 1,000 deployments a month, 1,000 plus time that we deploy in production. But that's actually common for all the services, right? There is a spec that is defined, and you follow that spec into your own microservice, and that
Right.
allows you to actually leverage that. Or like I'm talking about authentication, there is a spec that defines how you manage authentication and authorization within your service, and then as long as you comply with the spec, you actually get that out of the box. So that's how we build the
Right.
common platform layer. Um, and then on top of that, you have each of these services, right? The backend services that actually kind of sits on top of it. Um, and built in different languages, built in different frameworks,
Right.
depending on and when they were created and what was in place. Uh, and then over the times we kind of standardize it, right? So the philosophy and the concept that it's the way I talk about it is how Twitter actually described it uh, maybe 5 6 years back. You let thousands flowers bloom and then you let 999 of them die. So that's how our microservice journey has been. That we had a lot of different frameworks, kind of like Scala, Python, Ruby, PHP, Java. Within Java, multiple frameworks. We have tried all of them, but over
Wow.
the last few years, we have kind of now standardized this thing. Spring Boot, React, right? So kind of some level of standardization that has happened, and we now have actually internal templates that if you want to start a new service. So if you want to start a new service in Practo today, you actually go and it's called Practo Boot, and then you actually just go to Practo Boot, you choose a bunch of components, and you get logging, error handling, authentication, queue management, crons. A lot of these most common things that any services require are configured out of the box, and also a structure, right? So when you move from one code base to another code base, you are not completely lost because the structure kind of follows the same when you move from one service to another service. So as an engineer, if I'm
Hmm.
working on service A, tomorrow I change team, I go to service B, I open the service B code base, I know the structure is the same. This is where I will find, this is how the logging works, this is how error handling works, this is how monitoring works. All those primitives are the same, which is what we have tried to kind of maintain and build over time. Yeah,
Got it.
yeah. So that's the
Interesting.
journey.
And what databases do you use? SQL, NoSQL, mix of databases?
It's mostly SQL. As an organization, we actually prefer SQL databases over NoSQL databases.
Right.
Right. So our unless you have a very good argument on why we should use a NoSQL database,
Right.
the standard preference is SQL. Right, and the reason is that NoSQL actually gives you a lot of guarantees, right, which have improved significantly on the NoSQL side over the last decade or so. But over
Yeah.
the time, we have always found some challenges here and there. So, and what we have seen in a lot of our use cases also, our data are fundamentally relational in nature,
Yes.
right? So that actually allows us to kind of use them in the way they are supposed to be used, right? So a preferences of our database is always SQL. Even within that, we actually prefer MySQL over any other SQL database. And the
Okay.
reason why we have tried to kind of force these kind of consistency as much as possible within the org, even though a lot of people in Practo's journey would not have liked my approach here, and there has always been some opinions which are different, but I really believe there is a lot of value in building expertise within the org, right? So when you actually
Yeah.
use the same database across 50 different services, you fundamentally create the probability of having run into a issue goes up significantly. So every time something goes wrong in MySQL and it's not really behaving the way, and you start talking about it, you will always find within the org somebody who will say, "This happened to us 2 months back, right? Same problem. This is
Right.
how we solve for it. This is what you have missed. This is the tuning that you do to make it work." So we have tried to kind of build that
Yeah.
expertise as much as possible. We do use MongoDB here and there, but it's nowhere near scale. We use Dynamo quite a lot now, mostly as um mostly as a layer to kind of manage some high throughput use cases, because we found that we actually are able to get a much higher throughput in Dynamo compared to relational database. But they
Right.
are not the core entity storage, right? So it's very rare you will find a core entity in Practo is actually being stored in a NoSQL database.
Understood. So, by that you mean that it is not the source of truth. It always has
Yes.
a copy of some data which is optimized for reads.
Yes.
Got it. Interesting. Do you use Elasticsearch by any chance for search? Like, how is the search powered?
Yes. So we do use Elasticsearch quite extensively within our ecosystem. It is where majority of practice search experiences are actually powered by Elasticsearch, including our core search. Um, at least, but nowadays it's a much more complex pipeline than just calling it based on Elasticsearch. Elasticsearch is still an important part of the of our search ecosystem. And when I say the core search, I mean when you go and search for a doctor on Practo.com, it's still it's powered by, but of course there are a lot more pieces around it now, and it's a much more complex pipeline that exists today. Yeah.
Got it. Interesting. So, this sort of lays out the tech landscape. What are some of the biggest tech problems that you are trying
Mhm.
to attack today in Practo?
So it's actually there are couple of things that kind of come to my mind. Right.
Right.
Some of them are more opportunities than problems, but we see them in a very similar light, right? So, so one of the things that we are actually very much focused on and trying to kind of figure out is the whole conversation around AI and LLMs and generative AI over the last year, and how do we leverage that within our products, um, and how do we actually build expertise on how you can leverage that. So the way to think about it, at least how at least I see it, is every major uh, transformative technology gives startup an opportunity to actually leverage that to create large differentiation. So if I look at Practo's journey in 2012, 2013, when we were actually launching Practo.com, you know, SEO and web was still in their early days in India, an Indian context, right? And we were able to leverage that and capture that quite well because we were actually building that expertise since 2010. Uh, if you look at the mobile wave, which I would say 2016, 2017 in India, where actually a lot of
Yeah.
companies saw a lot of traction happen, we were able to create and get a lot of value out of that major technology shift by being early in doing investments back in 2012, 2011. Right, so our first mobile app was actually released in 2011 or early 2012, right? I'm actually early 2012 because I remember it was just around the New Year after January of
Right.
2012, right? And that allowed us to understand the value and the nuances of the platform early. So that's one thing that we're trying to kind of figure out, right? And how do you, specifically in AI and LLM, how do you kind of remove the noise and the distraction and kind of understand at a very fundamental level of where this technology can really add value, right? Which is fairly difficult because it's very early, right? You don't really have a lot of examples to, right? And
Yeah.
what our learning has been that when you start doing this exploration, majority of the paths are dead ends, right? So the question is, how quickly can you reach the dead end and come back and then start looking for the next path?
Nice.
So that's kind of one area. The second area where we're doing some interesting work and some of the challenges that we're trying to solve is just our video consult platform,
Mhm.
right? Which where we do a fairly high volume, and there is always the question of low bandwidth, low end mobile phones, and how do you actually provide? And we have generally used the third party tool to actually enable that. But right now we are trying to figure out and see if at least I am thinking is there something that we can do our own investment and build on top of existing things, right? We don't really want to reinvent the wheel, but how do we actually create a much better experience for our consumers? And of course, there is always the dimension of efficiency and cost. So some of the things that we are trying to kind of figure out is how do we make our platform a lot more efficient? How do we make it a lot more cost effective as we scale our products, right? How do we make sure that the cost is not a linear growth to
Right.
your traffic, to your transactions, and you can actually optimize it further and further.
Interesting. Very interesting. I think everybody is exploring LLMs and OpenAI at this point. Um, but the problem of video consult platform, I think that's very specific to India and absolutely worth
Mhm.
solving as well. Can you talk about some early architectural decisions
Mhm.
that were taken in Practo, which
Mhm.
still survive today? Are there any? Uh,
There are quite a few. The question is, you want the good ones or you want the disastrous one? Because I have
both,
examples of. Um, so I'll
both.
give you the good news first, good ones, which I,
Okay.
I really believe that some of the things that we did in early on kind of have helped us quite a lot. So
Okay.
when we actually launched, we actually didn't start as a B2C company, right? The first 3 years of Practo existence, we were a B2B SaaS company. Our first product, Practo Ray, which I was talking about earlier, uh, was built for doctors to manage their clinics. But we always had the inkling that at some point in time, we will launch the consumer side product, right? But we needed to really create the supply and get the doctors to start using software for us to really enable consumer side experiences. So when we were actually in 2011, 2012, when we were actually had gotten to a scale on the doctor side, and we had about 10,000 doctors or 8,000 to 10,000 doctors actually using our software, and we are trying to kind of decide and on our consumer platform. And of course, the first use case that we finally came down to was effectively launching what today people know us for, which is searching for doctors and booking appointment, right? And then when we were actually started building that platform, right, we had one type of user, which is doctors, and we had an authentication system built for it, and how people actually interact with the system, with everything. And then when we started building the consumer side of the product, we had a choice to make, to create another authentication system which is very focused on consumer, right? But what we ended up doing, right, and this is back in 2011, 2012, is to not actually create another authentication system, right? We actually decided to create an independent authentication system. Uh, you know, a lot of early engineers in Practo, including myself, we actually very firmly believe in standards and open source projects and everything. So we actually did uh, OpenID implementation as the central authentication system. All right.
Okay.
And even today, Practo.com, you can actually use it with any OIDC service. Uh, right. So a lot of our internal, our external, a lot of our different systems actually still use that authentication system, which was actually created based on our open standard. And the reason why it has been, I mean, to be very honest, we didn't really understand the implication of it till very later. But what was very interesting, as our products grew, as we built more services, as we built more products, the biggest value that we got was we didn't have to teach people of how our authentication works. So when we scaled
Right.
from a small team to a medium team to a very large team, right? You could just Google how OpenID works, read it, and you know how Practo's authentication system works, right? Because this is no custom magic, no weird incantations that you have to make to really make it work. As long as you follow the OpenID spec, and you can take any open source OpenID client library and you can use it, and it works with Practice authentication system. So that's kind of
Interesting.
one of the example of what actually has been very, very helpful.
How many years was this into the Practos journey when you decided to use OpenID?
This is year 3, so this is third year of our existence. Yeah.
Okay, and that's still early. That's quite early in a startup's journey, and usually startups don't decide to use like open standards, because open standards, or any standards for that matter, bring more complexity with them. They are
Yeah.
more comprehensive, and hence you have to cover a much wider base,
Mhm.
which sacrifices speed,
Mhm.
right? Did you have
Yeah.
this dilemma while choosing OpenID, or going something simplistic which just cuts your slack? Uh, how
So
was that thought process like?
yeah, yeah, no, this
Yeah,
that tension has always been there, right? And what my philosophy that has been, and I'm also very thankful for some of the early people at Practo who had a very similar alignment as this, right, is that there is a distinction between, and if you remember, I was telling you, right, in Practo we think about as a core platform layer and then business services, right, sitting on top of it.
right,
So, and everything in things that we have built in the core platform layer of Practo are actually things that has taken us much longer, because they are much more generic. They follow a lot of standards. They have very strong opinions on the approach, right? And we have tried to kind of, even if it is not a open standard that we have adopted, and we have created our own standards, they are fairly well standardized, right? I mean, they are very well thought out, right? So those are things that taken us a lot longer to build, right? But the reason why we do this with the core platform services is because we believe that these are the things which are going to be used by a lot of our engineers internally, right?
right,
And when you actually build these things, you can't really change very quickly, right? Because if you change very quickly, you're not backward compatible, you're breaking things. You don't break things for yourself, you break things for 50 services, right? And the cost of actually going to 50 people and saying, you know what, yesterday you were doing X, I want you to do Y, all of you need to do this by next Saturday, so that Sunday all 51 of those services will be deployed together, right? You don't really want to be in that situation very often, right? You can't avoid it, but you want it to be a rare occurrence and not something that happens very often. So that's why a lot of our core platform services, which generally have taken a lot longer, right, on how we have built them, and they have evolved. And a lot of those pieces have been working the same way more or less in the last 13, 14 years, right? There has been changes, there has been improvements, but the fundamental core concepts of those products, right, hasn't changed, right? And that's why it's very important to actually take the time. So when we did the authentication system, we knew that once we roll this out, and then every service that we actually introduce, right, we are actually creating a trap for us, that changing it is going to become very, very difficult, right? So this is a very good example of what we have done, and I will now tell you.
So this is a classic. One second. This is a classic example of higher capex that you invest at the beginning, but then it relieves you of any operational cost later. And in that sense, this is a non-intuitive explanation of why speed and quality are synonymous, right? If you are optimized for speed, um, people think that quality will take a hit, but or rather, if you optimize for quality, speed will take a hit. That's a more wider belief. But here you optimized for quality, and speed hasn't taken a hit because you haven't spent time in fixing things afterwards, and that has just earned your time back, and hence more speed. So quality equals speed. Awesome. Yeah, tell us the more spicy one where things went not so good.
I have multiple of them, but I will tell you a example which is the same concept but actually went wrong. Okay. And we still use it. So this is a system which is still in use in Practo, but every day I look at it, I feel really bad that I actually made this decision. And to a large extent, I made this decision, right? So when we were actually building Practo, we wanted the navigation, the user-facing navigation, to be consistent across products, right? Because we have multiple products, you can actually go to any one of those products, and a lot of us users, both on doctor side and consumer side, actually use multiple of those products. Now, historically, when you go from product A to product B to product C, all of those front ends are built independently at various point of time. And when you move from one to another, you will see that the navigation actually changes significantly, which was a very poor, bad experience for everybody, right? To solve for this problem, we took a call and we decided to create what we call Practo Nav, right? So the idea was that the core navigation of Practo is going to be a central service, right? It's built using JavaScript, CSS, HTML, and how it actually works is that within your application code, you initiate the navigation, and then it actually renders it there, right? So, and then if I need to make any change, let's say I want to just change, I will give a very simple example, right? I want to change the copyright year, right? I want to go there and say, hey, no, 2023, I want to change that to 2024, right? Let's say you have hard coded it for some reason, right? Rather than using a function, right? And you want to change it, right? Now I have to actually go and change it in 20 different products, right? So, but in this implementation, I go to the footer, I change it, I deploy it, and then every product now has it. Or I launch a new product tomorrow, and I want it to be available on the interface of all the other products. I can change it at one place, and then I go there, and it changes everywhere.
Yeah, it seems very intuitive. What's the catch?
Yeah, what's the catch exactly, right? So it seemed very intuitive when we actually did it. But what we realized over a period of time is, when we actually did this in our implementation, right? The way, and this is the distinction between a good idea and bad implementation. So in our implementation, effectively how you actually do it is you actually define the version of the nav that you're using. Okay. And then every time we release a new version of the nav, you have to actually go and update in your code base the version number. right? Which actually gives you backward compatibility. So if I release a new version of the nav, your product is not impacted. But what we wanted to avoid is what we ended up happening, that today if I release a new version of nav, I have to go to everybody in the company saying, you update your nav version, you update your nav version, you update your nav version, you update your nav version,
Yeah.
right? And then everybody has to update their nav version. And then we still have the tedious process, right? It's not very simple because you have to actually go and change it everywhere. So that's kind of a
Mhm.
good example of good intent but bad implementation, right? If I really have to uh, rethink it, right, and say that how do you actually do this, right? I would have actually said that there is no versioning, right? You always run the latest version of the nav, right? And
Yeah.
when I am actually releasing my latest version of the nav, I actually have a screenshot service which actually compares the old version and new version, and if something is breaking, it will actually tag the person whose product is being broken, and that person can come and fix it, because mostly I'm going to break one of 50 and not all 50 of them, so the 49 people can live their life happily. Right. And now I am now, but since we have been used to this practice, we have been kind of stuck in that loop of how actually we have built it. Yeah, so another example of trying to kind of solve for a thing smartly, but not really understanding that you end up at the same problem, even though it seems like at surface that that's a much cleaner, easier solution.
Right. Do you package it at the build time
Yes.
with the front end service, or does it? Oh, you package. Why package? Can't it be loaded at runtime when the
Uh,
front end loads, and it'll just get the new version, and the testing can happen through the
yeah.
screenshot service that you mentioned?
No, sorry. We don't package it. It's actually pulled in real time.
Okay.
But you are effectively writing the nav version, right? So you say that
Hmm.
7.1.2. Now, if I release 7.2, then you have to actually go and change your to 7.2, right? And then effectively every time we release, right? It's like any package management solution, right? Like think of it as if you're using Node and you're using npm,
Yeah.
right? How do you
Yeah.
actually go about saying so you say effectively is that I'm not going to say 7.2.1, I'm going to say 7, right? Approximately 7. So within the 7 series, I want everything to be auto updated and pulled.
Yeah.
And if I'm seeing a major change going from 7 to 8, only then I want to actually intervene.
Correct.
Um, right? So at least the bug fixes and minor versions rollout happen automatically. But of course, hindsight is always good. But when we thought about it originally, we didn't really think that how tedious it will get as the number of, because when we launched it, we had like 6, 7 services, right? So you didn't really realize it. The moment you get to 50 front-end services, you realize, okay, this is too much pain in the butt.
Interesting. Very interesting. So what this makes me think, Abhinav, is that so you mentioned a couple of things. Open standards is one,
Mhm.
and many things were done right, which didn't require you to change them.
Mhm.
Did it result in lesser tech debt, or was there still tech debt by the virtue of languages outgrowing their older versions and things breaking in the older versions of the languages?
Mhm.
I assume yes. I mean, 16 years. Practos founded in 2008, so 16 years
Yeah.
is a long time. And
Mhm.
how do you tackle the tech debt burden?
Okay.
How do you prioritize it? Because that's
Sure.
usually a tough question.
So actually, before I get into how do we prioritize it, I really want to kind of talk a little bit about what really is tech debt. And I think there is a
Yeah.
general misconception that exists in our community. Okay, like most
Hmm.
of the people, if I ask them what tech debt is, most people will get it wrong. There's a difference between mess and there's a difference between tech debt. They may on the surface seem like the same thing, but in reality they are not. What I really
Okay.
mean by it, tech debt is a intentional choice. Mess is a poor execution. Okay, they are not the same things. Okay, so a lot of time when I'm talking to people, all right, they actually see that they are the same thing. Right? I was
Hmm.
in a hurry. I needed to release it. I wrote the code badly. That is not tech debt. I made a design choice that I know will not scale tomorrow, right? Is tech debt because I'm taking an
Right.
intentional call, right? So, as an engineering leader, the first thing that you need to do is to stop the mess, okay? Which is
Right.
where majority of the problem actually stem from, which is a difficult problem to solve, right? Because it requires a constant rigor, right? Good
Yeah.
quality code in large teams is very intentional, right? It very rarely happens automatically. It happens automatically in very small teams by itself, right? But as the team grows, a lot of us actually believe that that will scale, which doesn't. And then you end up with what I would call mess. Now, to stop the mess, you have to stop it at the core, right?
Yeah.
And and over the journey of Practo, we had our ups and downs in this process, right? Which actually there are periods where we have been able to manage the mess quite well. There are periods where we have failed miserably, right? And that actually stems from having engineers who really care about code quality. Okay. And
Right.
that is what you need to build as a part of the culture, right? That when I
Right.
am doing a code review, right, it is not a burden, it is not a task assigned to me, it is a responsibility that I'm taking to actually be, right, very critical about bad smelly codes, right, and calling it out and getting it fixed, right.
Yeah.
And a lot of time when people actually think about it, we think about that that's actually very time consuming, right? But in reality, it's not. In reality, as long as you follow the principle of saying, I'm not going to have very large pull requests, so I'm never going to give a pull request with 50,000 line of code changes, right? My 1,000 is my maximum limit. Ideally, I want to be 500 and under, right?
Yeah.
As long as you follow that principle, the code reviews becomes a lot more easier, and you want the senior engineers to actually spend a lot of time in giving a lot of feedback in improving the code quality at source, right? Now coming to the second part, which is actually tech debt, right? Just like
Right.
for running any business, debt is actually quite important, right? So most businesses can't really scale and build something large, right? Unless they are very lucky without debt, right? So it's a leverage, and that's where the terminology come from, right? From the financial wealth. All right.
Right.
So when you actually do end up incurring debt, the first question is, when does it make sense to actually take the debt, right? And in my journey, the answer has been fairly simple: is that if I am working on an idea where the outcome is the probability of a good outcome is low. That means I don't know whether this thing will succeed or not succeed. It is okay to take the debt, right? Because the debt I'm taking is giving us to validate this win, right? Either I will get disproportionate reward or it's a complete failure, and I can throw away the code. And maybe that's a concept that I will circle back a little bit, right? And that's it. But once you have taken the debt, right, and again, kind of following the financial world philosophy, right? You have the principal and you have the interest. Okay. So when
Okay.
I took a take that and I took a shortcut, right? What does it really practically means, right? I have now an enhancement to implement a new feature within the same module code base service, right? If I had not taken the tech debt, it will take me 5 days to build the new feature. Since I took the debt and made a shortcut, rather than 5, it's gonna take me 7 days, right? And that is my 2 extra days is my interest of taking
Right.
this debt, right? So now the question is, if your cost of principal payment is higher than the interest, most of the time it is better to pay the interest than to solve for the principle, right? So what you realize is that it's like taking any loan, right? We want to be in a scenario where I can walk into the bank and pay a lump sum account and close the loan, right? But it's
Right.
practically very rarely it happens. That means you have to keep paying the interest. So the only way to actually solve for tech debt in longer term is by keep paying for the principal at regular interval, right? So if my EMI is 70,000 rupees a month or 50,000 rupees a month, I pay 50,000 rupees towards the interest maybe, but every once in a while I also put in 20,000 rupees towards principal. All right.
Right.
So that's the iterative mindset of actually doing. The moment you actually start thinking about it in an iterative way, right, then the only way you can do it is when you are touching that code, because
Right.
you don't really have to actually create saying that I'm going to stop everything that I'm doing and whatever the business needs and whatever the priorities are, I need to carve out time to solve for this, right? Now every time I've seen people get extremely frustrated with this thing, that I am not getting the time to solve this problem, right? I
Like
need two
impossible.
days, I need one week, and I will fix this, right? And I keep
Yeah.
telling them that it's a process, right? So, but
Right.
what actually doesn't happen, right, and what is very important to build as part of the culture is when you're touching that code, right, you don't fix the problem,
Hmm.
right? Because again, in your head, fixing the problem is I need to fix it 100%. So you actually create this image in your head, it's either 0 or 100, but you're not thinking that let me do 20% improvement, and the next time I come back to this, I'm going to do the next 20% and next 20%. And if you approach it this way, then you don't need to have a stakeholder conversation, you don't need to convince the management, you don't need to negotiate with the product team to actually do this, right? You're
Right.
actually, and that is the job of engineering team, to actually constantly making everybody else outside of engineering aware that the interest that is being paid, that means something which should have taken 5 days to us is now taking us 7 because of the tech that we took, right? And then iteratively keep working at playing the principal, right? So that you pay the principal, you close the loan so that you can take the next one. As
Right.
long as the company survives, you will keep taking the loan, so that that
Yeah.
doesn't go away. But the question is, how do you actually balance this out? And my learning has been that's the only way to really solve the problem, is to keep chipping away slowly and slowly. But what happens, right, over time, and even we as a company have struggled with it, and including myself trying to really get it, is that a lot of time we just give up, because chipping away at tech debt is a very tedious process, right?
Okay.
You actually feel the pain of it every time, and then you say, oh, I did some effort but the problem doesn't go away. Now next time I go there, I feel the pain again, I do the
Yeah.
20% improvement, then after 5 months I come back again, I feel the pain, I do the 20% improvement. So it's a very tedious process, right? So
Hmm.
I've seen people, and including myself at some time, just give up, saying I'm going to just live with this tech debt, it's okay. And that's the distinction that you need to create, right? And I'm personally, I still don't have a very good answer on how do you kind of create incentives for the team to not give up on chipping away at tech debt. It's a very cultural thing, maybe, on uh, how you actually get engineers to value that, right?
Yeah.
Because that's actually something which outside of engineering nobody else values, right? So
Right.
I actually went and paid 20% of the principal is not something for which you will get kudos, right? So that's the thing that
Yeah.
really needs to be fixed within the organization, and how do you actually get to, yeah. And the last thing, which I said I will circle back, which is throwing away the code. You
Right.
should really celebrate it. The easiest code to maintain is the code you don't have. So
Yeah.
every time you can actually shed the complexity and throw away some code, you should really celebrate it. Which again, I've seen people get very attached, right? So when new engineers are actually onboarding in Practo, I do this presentation, right? And there's this book I really love. It's called Psychology of Programming. Okay, so if you have not read it, definitely should read it. I recommend it to everybody in this field because this doesn't talk about actual computer science principles, right? It actually talks about the psychology. And one of the core tenet of this is you are not your code, right? And it's a very important value to kind of instill early on in your career, that people actually start seeing their worth as the code. So every time then when they have to throw the code, they actually get hurt, right? And you need within the team that mentality to be reversed, right? That throwing away code and deleting code is celebrated and not, right? You feel the dread saying, oh, what did I do?
Yeah. Oh man, I've struggled with this myself a lot, where you start emotionally getting attached to the system that you created. It's almost your baby,
Mhm.
and because you worked so hard and you've built it beautifully. And yeah, that's what holds the teams and then eventually the professional also back,
Mhm.
where people end up just getting disconnected from the company, um, and they leave altogether, which is a disaster.
Yeah.
Rather throw away the code and build something new,
Mhm.
and you can see the logical progression. Um, Amazing. I love the tech debt analogy, Abhinav. Just to add, chipping away sometimes gets exhausting, but then continuing um, continuing the analogy, sometimes maybe you have to do some big bang cleanups,
Mhm.
like Diwali cleanups, and you take a week, clean something up, repay a big chunk of it,
Yeah.
and that gives you the energy back. It brings it more to a manageable level.
Yeah.
So that's something I've seen work, where
Yeah.
typically setting aside like 1 week a quarter, which is 1 out of 12 weeks,
Mhm.
or even 1 week a half year, right? That works quite well. These are
Mhm.
very good week projects, hackathon sort of projects, where maybe there is a tech debt that everybody is struggling to
Yeah.
wrap their head around and like how to repay, and
Mhm.
you hack your way around it and
Mhm.
becomes a very very good hackathon outcome.
No, I
Um,
completely agree, and I think it's not just that you need to do that. Actually, I really feel that there are things where the paying the debt is really valuable, right? Because the interest that you're paying is significantly higher, right? So even within Practo, I mean, we do that all the time, and I really tell the team that specifically for the engineering managers and the leaders,
mhm.
that you really need to learn how to make that case outside to rest of the stakeholders, right? And that's a skill to be able to convince, right,
Yeah,
other people of why it is important. But I really believe that, um, and again, I really think that measuring things is a little difficult in engineering, and this kind of have been a big contention and challenge for most of the people over the year. But I think a lot of times we as engineers kind of deal in absolute. So even though all of us have studied probability and relative things, right, we kind of forget that not everything needs to be absolute, right? And you can convince other people based on using relative metrics, which are as important as absolute metrics, right? But I see a lot of people and leaders actually kind of struggle saying that either it is absolute metric or no metric. There is no middle ground. So that if you can bridge that gap, you can actually
yeah.
convince the management to pay the debt, which is good for the long term, and you should every once in a while do that.
This pops a very interesting question, Abhinav,
Hmm.
which is engineering's value to a business.
Yeah.
Eventually, we as engineers are serving the business,
Hmm.
and engineering by itself doesn't have value except for like really specific things like Linux kernel, for example, or some of the foundational open source projects. But then, yeah, like you take your chances. But otherwise, if you are working in a company, you are really serving the business.
Yeah.
And is this understood very well by the engineering teams? And you being an executive, you have seen the other side of how you want engineering to serve the business,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
What would you tell the teams how to behave, how to not behave
Yeah.
to do this more effectively?
Because this is a topic that is very close to my heart, right? Because I personally have kind of struggled with it quite a lot in the early days because, of course, Practo was the only company I've ever worked on. So I didn't have experience. I didn't knew a lot of people who have done this, right? And I went from managing, engineering team of 4 or 5 people to 400 people. So a lot of it was new experience. I'm very thankful that I found a lot of people who have done this at scale and got to learn from them quite a lot. But this is something that I kind of kept thinking about. How do I explain this in a very simplistic way, right? And I think I've kind of evolved in my journey and had multiple evolution of how I explain this. But I think finally I've gotten to a place where I've kind of covered all the nuances of it, which is where I realized that I was failing, right? So back in 2017, I felt that I have finally cracked it, all right? And on our quarterly reviews for engineering team, where we actually talk about how the quarter went, what we did well, what are the things to celebrate, what was our quality metric, what was our performance metric, what was our uptime metric, right? We put some numbers out there to kind of objectively measure of how we are doing as a team. And I still remember in one of those quarterly review, I actually put up a slide, the first slide, right? And the slide said that, what is the purpose of engineering team at Practo, right? And the second slide said, the purpose of the engineering team at Practo is to make the business win. All right. And I still really believe that that's the core purpose of engineering is. And it's not just true for engineering, it is for everybody, right? As long as you're running a for profit business, right? For every functional group, this has to be the most important and objective, right? Like if the business is not winning, then what is the purpose of having the function, the people within the team? But what I didn't realize when I actually put this statement out is it has a very deep, important nuance built into it. And I think that is where I have seen most engineering leader, including myself for some period of time, struggle quite a lot. Because when you actually start with the statement, you can actually very easily, right, come to a conclusion that to make the business win, the thing that you need to do is listen to the business and execute whatever they are telling. Okay. And that's the worst takeaway you can take from this statement. Okay. And I think I have seen a lot of engineering leaders actually take this as a takeaway and then feel extremely tired, demotivated, disillusioned. Then what am I doing in my life? Right? Because you walk into the every meeting, somebody from the management tells you, dude, X. You come out of the room, you rally the team, you run everybody X, 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 X. And then you go to the next meet. A few weeks later, you want to go to the meeting and say, no, no, not X, Y. When you come out of the room and you go, why, 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 why? And I think that's not the function of engineering function. Right? And that is actually true for almost every function in any organization. But specifically for engineering, this is a lot more important, is building tech products and tech solutions, right? Is a very creative process, right? You can give me a spec, right, saying that build this, and I can build it 1,000 ways, right? Some very bad, some great, right? And there is a judgment call that needs to be taken for this company, for this scenario, for this target segment of customers at this price point. What is the best solution, right? And that's the reason why measuring engineering productivity is very, very difficult, right? Because if I reward people for just fast, then you can give me the worst solution, which is complete shit, and then I will say, oh, this guy is the most productive person. But that's not true, right? Because I will deal the consequence of it not today, not tomorrow, but maybe 6 months later, maybe a year later, maybe 2 years later, right? Where the disaster of it that he has introduced some stupid security bug because of which all of the company's data is gone, right? And then you will say this person whom I regarded as my best engineer, most performing guy, is the villain now. So that's kind of what makes engineering very difficult. And that's the value that an engineering leader needs to add, right? To make business win, you need to walk into the room and present your opinion of why we should do what we should do. If you believe that whatever everybody else is standing on one side of the table touting X, and you should have the insight and the willingness to say not X, Y, and Y is the correct answer, right? And I see a lot of engineering leaders not take that responsibility, right? They will shy away from it, right? And that's kind of maybe a lot of engineers
Yeah.
are introvert by nature, so maybe it's kind of the side effect, right? But they don't really do that. So to make business win, you have to actually go and say that I know you want this to be done in 20 days, but for the long term of the company, I want to take 35, and here is why we should take 35,
Right.
right?
It's that articulation.
Rather,
You should be able to
right,
put your finger on it and say
and
that this will go wrong if you don't do it. Like that ability to
exactly,
put your finger, like that.
yeah, exactly, right.
Relax. Uh,
And that is the skill which most of us kind of shy away from, right? And what is very important, like what most people don't realize, right? And it is just like any other skill. It's not something like very unique, right? You build it by practice, right? You don't. There is no one book I can tell you, two YouTube videos to watch, and tomorrow you will wake up with this skill. There is no
yeah.
way, right? This is a practical skill that is only way to run it is to actually do it, and you will. The person standing in front of you will win the first 10 times because the person sitting in front of you or standing in front of you has been doing this for maybe 5 years, maybe 10 years. You're gonna lose. Go back, but you will learn in the process on how
Right.
to really make that argument and how to present your perspective and how to really understand that there is a unique expectation, unique language, unique approach that we require with every single person, right? So
Yeah.
just like we say in engineering, right, that you don't treat some cool piece of tech, right, saying every problem is a nail, so I'm going to take my hammer to it. Similarly, right, you don't say that every person is going to say. So that's a nuance to build, right? But the purpose of engineering is that to be
Yeah.
able to balance short term, long term, when to take the debt, what's important for the company, understanding that and presenting your perspective and being able to navigate that really, really well. And it's a very, very difficult thing to do, all right? But that's what differentiate great engineering leaders from mediocre ones, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And if you build it, I can tell you that there is a big shortage of such leaders in our industry. So if you are in the early part of your engineering management journey, right, focus a lot on building the skill. And if you really succeed at it, you can do wonders, right? And people will be running after you to come work with
How? So, okay. So two questions here, Abhinav.
them.
See, first is it's almost like you're saying that this is not a skill to learn, but rather this is a hurdle which you need to unlearn, where your instincts keep telling you don't say no, don't, you can't disagree, you can't take a stand. Maybe that's like the Indian culture, how we are brought up. It's a very patriarchal society that we have all been brought up in, and that's fine. And once you unlearn the urge of not saying no, the art of putting which argument in front of which person, that will probably come naturally. So that's fine. But the second statement, which is that if you have the skill, a lot of companies will be willing to hire. How do you highlight that? And how do you showcase that?
Let me
Is it
actually
just the
tell you
matter
this
of
way. No,
putting a
it's
line on your
actually
resume? Uh-huh.
it's not. It's not. It's not. It's not really putting a line in your resume, right? Um, And maybe this is not true for a lot of companies, maybe it's true for some exceptional ones, right? But when you go and talk to people, right, and when you have a conversations, right, um, a lot of time, if you are the person who really shaped the product and the project, and if you're a person who executed, right, are
Very
going to talk
common.
about the same thing very differently, right? So when you actually do that, you really have when you learn that skill and when you do things right, and when you have that conversation right, it comes out very naturally. So when I interview, right, and over the years, for me it's become quite intuitive to kind of differentiate between people who executed and people who shaped a little bit or shaped all of it. There's a spectrum, and maybe understanding that is very difficult, right? But you will have the insights which other people don't have, right? Because for that you will have to understand the trade-offs really well, right? At the end of the day in business, it's all about the trade-offs. Everything is a trade-off, right? You're trying to really say today, based on the information I have available, right, which trade-off I'm going to make. And the people who understand that are the people who are shaping the product and shaping the decisions and not executing. Because you're not going to take the time to really understand the trade-offs really well, right? You will walk out of the room saying, I built this feature and this is what it did, right? But you don't have the insight of why that feature, why it was important, what impact it brought, and why we did the decision the way we did is very, very important to understand. And as an engineering, specifically for people getting into engineering management, once they get that, they will stand out quite clearly when you're having conversation.
Interesting, very interesting. This is, in short, this is owning business outcomes
Yeah,
rather than owning engineering outcomes, which
yeah,
are told to you by business. There's a
yeah.
stark difference. Interesting. Okay, sounds good. Moving on, cloud costs. That is a
Mhm.
hot topic, and many
Mhm.
companies are struggling with managing their cloud costs. Where
Mhm.
lately the cloud bill has been just shooting through the roof.
Mhm.
Has Practo seen that problem? And if yes, how have you managed it?
So we have seen this problem bits and pieces here and there. I had uh, the opportunity to have this conversation with a lot of companies over the years, and thankfully, in relative sense, right, we haven't really seen that to be a very large problem compared to most companies. And that, but every now and then it has. But the core fundamental reason why we have been able to actively work on it and kind of manage that more proactively. And I think if every company should do this, and that kind of will take away the first 50-60% of the problem, is just give your engineering team visibility into the cost of their service. You would be surprised, and I don't know what your experience is, but you can walk into 100 companies tomorrow and ask the engineer which service you own, and ask them what was your AWS bill this month,
They don't know.
right? And
They have no clue.
99% of people don't know. So if they don't know, then how will they improve it? How will they do it? So when we were trying to do this in 2017, 2018, right, is the first time we had the cloud costs discussion internally, right? And that's what our insight was, that most people don't know. So kudos to the team. Our team actually went to our deployment tool, right, where you can see all the services that you want to deploy, and they put a number there. So you can act today in Practo, when you go to our deployment tool, for every service you actually see a rupee value saying your service costs 29 lakhs last month. Did you know that? Right? And then next month, if it's actually doubles, you really know something you're doing wrong, right? So I think it's very, very important to really understand, right, that there is a cost attached to everything, right? And specifically in Indian context, it's extremely important, right? And I keep telling people that Now we operate in a market, right, where we actually pay in some way in dollars and earn in rupees as a business. So it's very, very important to understand, right, that how, a successful business needs to have margins, and cloud cost is actually, to be very honest, has been completely out of whack for some period of time, right? And there are two, like I said, one reason that I talked about already. The second reason is that all of us are extremely, including myself, I also have gone through that phase, are so enamored by scale that we really want to build for tomorrow, right? So we have built the service, we have done the thing extremely complex, saying, "Oh, this thing can do a million QPS," right? And you're like, "Amazing, right? Well done." And you say, "What's your QPS?" "My QPS is 1,000," right? And then you ask the question of why the hell? Then you built it, so you added so much complexity, and your base cost you have lifted it up here, right? With the hopes that amazing technical work done. It's a marvel that can handle a million QPS, but we are still at 1,000, right? So the business needs to go by 100x, right, to really leverage what you have built, right? And I don't know about most businesses, right? But even if you take the fastest growing business, right, in the world, right, who have grown 100x in the last 20 years, right? Forget last 2 years, last 20 years. And the answer is maybe 10, right? That's it, right? There are maybe 10 startups which have grown 100x in 2 years. Yeah? I can't imagine that number being more than 10. Right, so that's the challenge, right? That's the second challenge that right, and I wrote about it a few years back, and I keep telling my team, right, that code for today, don't worry about tomorrow, right? People feel that no, if the suddenly our growth happens, how will we handle this? Very easy. If you have the growth, you have the money. Do horizontal vertical scaling, and then you figure out how to optimize it. It's all right, you will get the time, you can hire more people. If you have the growth, you have the money, right? But if you actually build for future, you're adding unnecessary complexity, you're adding unnecessary cost, right? And yeah, and I have met so many companies, and I've asked them now what their cloud bill is, and they tell me the number, and I am like blown away by how ridiculously high it is for the company of their scale. All right. And the reason is, they're like, "Oh no, we are expecting 4x growth, so we're running this large." No, I know, right? Like, whatever the
Pre-provision.
largest size of their pre-provision throughput of 10,000. I'm like, but have you checked what your throughput is? Like, your throughput is like 20, right? So I think that's the challenge, and that's kind of has been a kind of a issue over the last few years, but I see that track changing quite dramatically, right? I mean, we had the zero interest policy phase of US economy has um created a lot of these challenges because the value of the money has kind of gone down dramatically for a period of time. But as companies are now focusing toward profitability, I think companies will do. And I think as long as you follow these two principles, cloud costs are fairly easy to actually manage. Make everybody aware of what your cost is. And second is, plan for today. Stop worrying
Right.
about tomorrow.
Right. How do you give that visibility? Is it just labeling of the resources and then give some read-only billing report that groups by the labels?
So yeah, actually, that's the easiest way if you want to do. We have done it as always in a more productized way. So effectively, if you go to, we have, like I said, we have our own deployment tool where every service is listed, and if you go to the service, right, you get a bunch of services. Even though it's kind of not really a deployment tool today, it's more of a central control tower for us. So for every service, when you go there, you can deploy, you can roll back, you manage all the configs from there, you see the cost of the service, You see all the Kubernetes pods that are running. You can see the log from there. You can see the metrics from there, right? You can run one-time tasks right from that web interface. So we allow you to do a lot of things there. But even if that is something you don't have today, like you rightly said, just tag every service with every resource with the service name, and then in Cloud Build you just pivot on the service name and you actually get some estimate. And you don't need it to be 100% accurate, right? As long as you are in 90% or higher range in terms of cost, that's good enough, because you're trying to give them a sense of the cost, right?
Yeah.
You're not trying to bill them, so you don't really need to be 100% accurate.
Oh, interesting. I didn't think about this. I always thought it in terms of like fairly granular accuracy,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, an estimate works as well.
Yeah.
Also, how do you bifurcate and give that visualization of the cost for lower environments? Because for production environments, you might have mature tooling that can
Mm-hmm.
estimate the cost. How about
Mm-hmm.
lower environments? How about ad hoc like experiments? Somebody just spun up a VM.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, how do you control that?
So effectively, every resource that is actually spun up in Practos context needs to have a tag of the
Okay,
team. So
okay,
if you didn't tag it, there is an alerting system that will say, hey, these are the
right.
untagged resources in the system, so they need to go and tag it, and that gives you again a sense of who is actually spending how much money on the staging and on the experimentation.
Understood. Understood. Sounds good. I think this was a really strong tech deep dive, both from the technical as well as technical strategy perspective, and amazing. I want to briefly touch upon your own journey. How have you evolved? Can you talk about some details of how has that journey from a developer to a CTO has been?
Mhm,
Any hurdles along the way? Give us some visibility.
mhm. Uh, So let me add a caveat. I realize that I should have done this clarification. So
Okay.
my role in the tech at Practo has kind of come down significantly, right? We did had a CTO that we hired recently, and that individual moved out of Practo. So I'm kind of managing engineering again, right? But I actually spend. We do have a head of engineering and in Sandeep, and I actually spend a lot of my time now running some of our B2B businesses, right? Just so to kind of set the
Oh,
context, a foundation a little bit, and I will circle back to that. But the reason I wanted to set that is that that's gonna make a lot more sense, because when I talk about how things are for me today,
yeah.
which are very different from how it used to be. So I actually, in Practo's journey, I see this, and you actually, when we were talking earlier, you kind of talked about it a little bit. I see this as these three phases, right? As a developer, as a manager, and as a manager of managers, right? And
Mhm.
each of them were very, very different. So in the early days of Practo, and to be very honest, some credit to Shashank also, because he also wrote a good chunk of our first version of product. But it's just that he was better at sales than I was, and that's why he got forced into selling the product. Right. So in the early days of Practo, there were only two roles in Practo. You either wrote code or you sold the product. Right.
Right.
So that was our core philosophy. Um, and then we got. I convinced one of my close friends, Siddharth, who's the third co-founder at Practo, to join us, and he was the other programmer, and we hired a couple of people, early engineers at Practo. And to be very honest, some of them left, but effectively there were three of us, me, Siddharth, and Praveen, who actually wrote most of the code in the first few years of Practo's existence.
Mhm.
That phase was mostly about writing code, right? We didn't have product managers, we didn't have designers, right? So the whole way it used to work is Shashank, uh, the other Siddharth, Manoj, Aditya. These are the people who will go out in the field, spend time in the field, meet doctors, talk to them, come back and just talk about what doctors are saying. And then, generally me, Shashank, Siddharth, we will spend some time discussing and come up saying, hey, this is what we need to build, right?
Right.
At a very high level. and then we will just sit down in front of the computer and code. So, but our schedules were pretty screwed up at that point of time because we're fresh out of engineering college in the early days. So my day would start at about 2 p.m. in the afternoon. So I'll wake up at 1, I'll have lunch, and I'll start writing code at 2 p.m. And we will write code till 4 or 5 in the morning. And at 5 a.m., I'll go to sleep, and then I'll wake up again. We were working 7 days a week.
So that's
Yeah,
basically
so
every waking hour you are just coding.
yeah,
If
yeah.
you're not sleeping, you're coding.
If I'm not sleeping, I'm coding, or I'm doing customer support because we also did
Right.
not have a customer support team. So the support phone number was my phone number. So every time a doctor has a problem, they will call and pick up the phone and I'll provide the support. So those were the only two things. But I was writing code, and now when I reflect back, the amount of code I was writing was like crazy, right? Because I was literally coding like 14, 15 hours a day, 7 days a week. Um, so that was very helpful because that really helped me hone my skill quite a lot. Because when you write that volume of code, you make a lot of mistakes, but that also is a great opportunity to learn from them. So I would say if I reflect back, the code that I wrote in 2008, then the code I wrote in 2009, 2010, 2011, right, there was like a exponential improvement that happened in that period for all of us, right, on the code that we were writing, the quality of the code, how we were able to improve on it, right? And now when I look back at the code I was writing in 2008, it was complete shit, right? Like people who get the opportunity to see it today, every once in a while somebody will pick me saying, why is this database table named this way and why are these columns named this way? And I will say, please don't ask me, because there is no way I can defend them because they are horrible names. So that was the first phase, and then we decided to actually expand the team of Practo. Right, we were doing fairly well. We had a bunch of customers, and then Sequoia came along as our first investor. So we decided to expand the team. We finally got our actual office because we were working out of Shashank's parents' house for the early days of Practo, and then we needed to hire people. And that was my second phase because that's when I needed to decide the kind of team I want to build at Practo and the kind of culture I want to create at Practo. So there were a couple of things that I did slightly differently. If you ask me today of why I made those decisions, um, even though I can actually give you some very good reasons,
Uh-huh.
which will sound very nice, I don't think I had that depth of thinking at that point of time. I did what felt right at that moment in time. But the early engineers at Practo were hired for their passion than for skill. Okay. So since
Interesting.
we couldn't pay very good salary, all right. So my target was I used to do about 200 interviews every month. Out of those 200 interviews, I will hire one person or maximum two people. And not because our bar was that high, but also because most of the people that I would like, we couldn't afford them. All right. So their salary expectation we couldn't match. So I have to let go of them. So I struggled for some period of time, right?
Mhm.
Thinking that, hey, what am I doing wrong? And then now when then I started meeting more people, and then what I realized, right, like I need to find people who are like me, right? uh, I am not a great developer in terms of architecture, design, right? Like core technical skills, right? That's not my forte, right? I am more of a practical programmer, right, than
Yeah.
a purist, and that's what I realized, that that's the kind of team I really want to build. So I had a very simple question, right? My first question for most of the people I have interviewed, and when you talk to them, they will tell you the only question on which I decided to hire most of the early engineers back to was, what was the first program you wrote, and can you walk me through of why you built it, right? And the people that I
Nice.
hired are the people who did not stop talking for 30 minutes after I asked this question. Right, and people and that's what I was looking for at that point in time, because they were really passionate, right? Like people will be like, oh, I really made this pool game, or I made this scheduling thing, or I did this, I wrote this program, which, and those were like really, like, if you ask me today, and if you talk to anybody, they'll be like, these are very stupid programs, right? Why? But for them, they were so passionate about it, right? Of why. So a large number of early engineers at Practo don't have computer science background. And some of the best engineers I have worked with them don't have computer science background, right? Um, Siddharth, like my third co-founder, Siddharth actually is from mechanical background, right? So a lot of people that I really worked very closely with actually didn't come from computer science background, but they were extremely passionate about building things, which is of value, and both parts are important. Building things which is of value, right? So that's how I built the initial team. We got to about 20, 25 people. We didn't have any hierarchy. We didn't have any promotions, no cycle, nothing, right? I was the manager. I had 25 people reporting into me. Every day I will decide who will be working on what. And I will just say build this, and people will go build it, right? And then we had our first product people come in, then we got some designers, then we got to more structured thing, and which is the third phase of Practo's journey, where I actually started spending a lot more time in understanding how to build scalable engineering teams, right? And to be very honest, this was a very difficult phase, because I think I have made more mistakes than correct choices in that journey, right? And in hindsight, I really feel that I could have done a significantly better job if I get to do it again today. But of course, I have already made most of the mistakes, so of course I will do a better job at it.
You stole the question. You basically stole the question from my mouth. How I was just going to say these are huge leaps, right? From going from a developer to a manager of managers. How stressful was it? And it's pretty stressful.
So at its peak, Practo had 400 engineers, so it was fairly stressful. I think what was very important, and to be very honest, I was blessed with, and I don't know how I found, to be very honest, these gem of individuals in the early engineers of Practo, right, whose values were very aligned with my values, right? So we were able to actually maintain that culture, a lot of it, right, as we scaled also, right? Because we valued value delivery, we valued quality, we valued finding the right balance between, short term and long term thinking, right? We actually forced people to think about today. It was okay to take shortcuts, right? It was more important to get the win today than to worry about the design, right? And some of the times this has backfired quite spectacularly on our face, right? But now sitting here, I feel that the amount of time it has made the business successful is so many more times, right? Multifold more times than the times where it has blown completely on our face. So that was the period, and then I had to move to a more structured approach on how we actually do things, what metrics to measure, right? How do we do training? How do we actually get people assigned, get people to actually do things in the right way? And then that was the process of actually building a lot of things, right? So we actually built a lot of tools internally, right? Whether it was our new engineer training program called Jedi School, which was like every new engineers will go through a month of training at Practo, where we actually not teach you technical things, but we teach you Practo cultural process, mindset things of what we really want you to do, right? Um, we scaled a lot of how our monitoring works. We added weekly meetings for learning, and right, we did a lot of things where people, we created groups for special skill set called tribes, where all the people from because we had so many teams, how do I bring all the front end engineers in the company together to actually talk about what's happening in the world, or how do I get all the Android engineers to come together? What's the right structure, horizontal, vertical, right? So a lot of that learning, a lot of failing, to get to a place where things kind of stabilize a little bit. We got to a place where we found our footing a little more. And then my role kind of transitioned into kind of finding the right leaders who have the experience to really make this happen, right? So that was the more bigger realization for me, right? That even though I know I can scale and do this, right, the the org should not depend on the speed at which that I can scale. So I need to bring in outside perspective in the org and people who have gone through this and seen this and can help us not make a lot of obvious mistakes. So that's the second part of the journey where we actually hired new leaders who actually came in and ran the thing and and kind of added a lot of values in a lot of different dimensions over the years. And then I think after COVID, no, I felt like it is the right time. Right. So we actually ended up finally hiring a CTO at Practo for the first time. And I actually stepped back from the technical role to start playing a business role because I felt that no, it was time for me to kind of get into a place and a thing which I'm not very comfortable with,
Right.
which actually forces me to continue learning.
This was a very massive realization that you should not be the bottleneck for the organization scaling. How difficult was it to come by? Like, did you make a lot of missteps and then somebody had to, like, it was it a rude realization or did it come more naturally with relatively lesser friction?
No, it's actually, to be very honest, it came quite naturally because at various point of time, I always kept taking up things which were kind of our big bets, right? So we did a US expansion in 2015-16, and I was the one who actually went there trying to set that up. It didn't really work out, but at that point of time, no, Siddharth and Hari, uh, the next set of engineering leaders kind of took over and started running a lot of these critical pieces. And I wasn't really involved in day to day anymore at that period of time for some period of time. And then that's when the realization kind of started happening, right? That at our size and scale, we need more seasoned leader, right? And that was not just true for engineering; that was true for quite a few functions at Practo. So we did that. Some of them were very successful, some of them were not so much. But in hindsight, it feels like it was an important part of the journey that we really needed to go through.
Got it. What also popped out to me from this very interesting narration is that it's not very elegant code in the early years or very elegant engineering, computer science engineering that backed Practo and resulted in Practo's initial success. It was rather the passion and the shared value system, which
Mhm.
uh, which reflected in your hiring as well, where you were trying to hire for people who are at the same level of passion and same kind of values, but also then in your subsequent employee training program, the Jedi program, for example, where again you are not training for that this system works this way and that works that way and you should do it this way and that way. It's more about imparting values and bringing them more at par with what values did the already existing employees believed in, and that's like the highlight for me, and that probably speaks about the level of success Practo has achieved today. This focus and emphasis on the value system is like one of the bedrocks for it to happen.
Yeah.
Awesome to see that. Okay, final question before we close today's conversation, Abhinav. Um, any interesting incidents that you would like to mention from back in the days? I'm sure there are a lot of stories around long nights, early mornings, no sleep. really ugly struggles to altercations to then really euphoric moments. Anything you would like to remember and then celebrate the journey with?
Oh, this is a tough one because there are so many to choose from. So I'll tell you two of them. Um, um, the first one is very interesting. So when we started Practo in 2008, and from 2009 to 2011, I was in Bangalore, and I was working on it. I had not been home for a long period of time. So after 2 years, I decided it's time for me to visit my family. So I actually took a leave for the first time in 2 years, and I actually went home. And when I was at home, on a specific day, my whole family, the town where I'm from, there's this very famous temple. So we decided to go to the temple as a family, and we went there. And the moment I'm inside the temple and the whole puja and everything is going on, and I get a call from Shashank. And Shashank's thing is that the company we were using for sending SMS has gone under, and they've shut down the service, right? And one of the very core functionality that we have, and the functionality which all our customers loved in the first iteration, was that every morning, all the day appointments for the day, the patient used to get a SMS reminder asking them to come to the clinic on time, and doctor used to get their schedule of all the appointments they have in the day. And that was the biggest differentiator and value addition, right? And because um, now this is such a common thing, but back in 2011, this was a novelty, right? To be able to
Right.
do this from on web. So yeah, I was there at the temple. I get a call, and then the whole infrastructure that I had built for sending SMS, right, was built over the year, because the first version that I built, because there was no bulk SMS service provider, it used to run on a Nokia phone connected to my machine, right? And the code
Okay.
written in C. Um, so and then some other provider came, so I built some layer on top of it, and then it was a HTTP API, and I was sending the SMS, and it was a queue system, and the crons and everything, right? And nobody and at that point in time, since there were just three of us, right, we were very bad at documentation, and because all three of us were always there, we were living together in the same house, so
Yeah.
there was no moment arise where you don't know how this works. So this
Right.
piece of code I was the only one who has ever actually touched it. I've written 100% of the code. Nobody was actually aware of how it actually works. So I actually sat down at the temple, and then on the phone. All right, there is no screen sharing. There's no smartphone. I don't have any smartphone. There's
This
nothing. I
is
don't have internet.
2011, is it?
11, right? Right. So I
11.
have
So
no.
just to put it in context, there was no 4G.
There was no 4G.
Android 2.2, 2.3, or maybe 2.4 was
Yeah,
going on at that time.
going on. Yeah, and I
Uh,
still had a feature phone at that point in time. So, so I can't see the code. So somebody is on the phone reading the code to me, all right, saying line number one, this is what it says. Line number two, this is what it
what?
says. And then I am saying, okay, can you open this file? Can you actually, okay, tell me what's written? And they'll tell me, like, okay, go here, go here. And
Yeah.
then I spent like maybe 45 minutes with the team on the phone, helping them rewrite the whole code to the new SMS provider. And it was
What
the
are you saying? This is
craziest
like,
thing, craziest thing
oh
I
my
have
God.
ever done. And yeah, by the by in the next few hours, they figured it out how the code actually works, and then the rest they actually went and did it. And by the evening, we were up and live again. So um, that's kind of one story, but that's not the craziest place. The craziest place I have actually done code debugging is I was in Banaras on a boat in middle of Ganga. That's the craziest place from where I have done code debugging. I was at one of my friend's wedding, and I went for the tour of the ghat in Banaras, and then I took a boat, and you actually go in the boat to the middle of the river, and then you see the aarti that happens on the on the ghat, and
Right.
that was my plan for the evening. So I did that. But the moment I reached the middle of the river, I got a call. Right. So at some period of time, right, there was this running joke at Practo that now people were afraid of me taking off, because for the first 4 or 5 years of Practo's journey, every time I took a vacation, something majorly went wrong. So
Right.
yeah, so that's kind of crazy stories here.
Wow. Have you had successful vacations since then? I assume yes.
I have many of them after that. So I think I finally broke the jinx at some point. I don't know how, but yeah, since then it's been okay.
And by the way, the first story turned out better than I thought. I thought it'll result in you flying back to Bangalore to like
Even I
integrate
thought
some
that
new
at one point
services.
that I will have to fly back to Bangalore. There is no other options. But we had some great people who were very patient with me in understanding how it really works. And then once they understood the larger approach that I was taking, they were able to actually go change the code quite a bit.
Amazing, very very amazing. We are hitting almost 1 hour 45 minutes of this conversation, and it was a blast talking to you, Abhinav. Thank you once again for doing this. Much appreciated.
Thank you so much, Bhavin. It was a pleasure. I got to actually share a lot more. It's good to reflect back on things. It's been some time I have kind of talked about it so candidly about so many things. So thank you so much for this opportunity.